What happens when the person sworn to uphold the law becomes its greatest enemy? In the hallowed halls of justice, one man, Judge Arthur Harrington, wielded his gavel like a tyrant's scepter, casting judgment not on facts, but on the color of a person's skin. His courtroom was a stage for prejudice, his verdicts a foregone conclusion. But one Tuesday morning, a young black teenager in baggy jeans and a hoodie was dragged before him. The judge saw an easy target for his scorn. What he couldn't see was the brilliant mind hiding behind the facade, an avenging angel of the law, about to turn his world upside down in the most epic downfall you will ever hear. The air in courtroom 4B of the Franklin County Courthouse was perpetually stale thick, with the scent of old paper, cheap disinfectant, and quiet desperation. It was the personal kingdom of the Honorable Judge Arthur Harrington, a man whose silver hair and tailored robes did little to conceal the rot of bigotry that had seeped deep into his bones. For 20 years, he had presided over this room, his authority absolute, his biases as predictable as the sunrise. On this particular Tuesday morning, the docket was filled with the usual procession of life's small-time tragedies, petty theft parole violations, and public disturbances. Then came case number 73B, the state versus David Williams. A young man was led to the defendant's table by a bailiff. He was maybe 17, 18 at most. He wore a black hoodie, the hood pulled down but still framing his face, a pair of dark baggy jeans and scuffed sneakers. He didn't walk with a swagger but with a weary slump, his hands jammed into his pockets until the bailiff gestured for him to take them out. He kept his eyes fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor. From his elevated bench, Judge Harrington peered down over his spectacles. A slow, reptilian smile touched his lips. This was his favorite kind of case. Simple, clear-cut. A chance to deliver one of his signature speeches about the erosion of society and personal responsibility aimed squarely at the young black man who embodied in his eyes everything that was wrong with the world. Well, what do we have here? The judge's voice boomed, dripping with theatrical condescension. Mr. Davin Williams, is it? Please stand when I address you, if you can manage that. The young man who the public defender's file identified as D. Rock to his friends slowly rose. He didn't look at the judge, but at his own feet. His public defender, a tired but earnest woman named Sarah Jenkins, stood beside him. Your Honor, my client is... Your client, Harrington cut in, holding up a hand, is present. I can see that. Let's see what the state has to say about Mr. Williams. He waved a dismissive hand at the assistant district attorney, a young, ambitious man named Kent Olson. Olson, eager to please the powerful judge, stood smartly. Your Honor, Mr. Williams is charged with vandalism and resisting arrest. On the night of August 5th, he was apprehended defacing the monument in Pendleton Park with spray paint. When officers approached, he fled, leading to a short pursuit and a struggle during the arrest. Judge Harrington leaned back, steepling his fingers. Vandalism, a classic. Defacing public property. Tell me, Mr. Williams, he said, his voice laced with scorn. What profound artistic statement were you making? Was it a commentary on socioeconomic disparity, or did you just run out of things to steal? The gallery, sparsely populated, remained silent. They knew this routine. Sarah Jenkins stiffened. Your Honor, my client maintains his innocence. He was simply in the park. The police did their job, Miss Jenkins, Harrington snapped. Something your client and his ilk seem to have a fundamental problem with. And please, let's dispense with the fantasy of innocence. Look at him. He gestured with an open palm towards the young man. The uniform of a miscreant. Hoodie, baggy pants. What's that on your shirt? Some sort of musical group I'm sure my daughter would find appalling. The young man, D. Rock, finally looked up. His eyes weren't filled with fear or anger, but with a calm, unnerving stillness. He said nothing. Cat got your tongue, son? The judge taunted. Or are you not used to forming coherent sentences? Let's see your record. He shuffled some papers, though everyone in the room knew he had memorized it already. Ah yes, 2 priors for loitering. A truancy violation. It paints a picture, doesn't it? A young man with no respect for rules, no respect for authority, no respect for property, and now he's graduated to vandalism. The trajectory is as predictable as it is pathetic. Sarah Jenkins tried again. Your Honor, the loitering charges were dismissed. He was just waiting for a bus. And the truancy, his mother was ill. He was helping at home. Excuses, Ms. Jenkins. The currency of the perpetually guilty, Harrington scoffed. He turned his attention back to D-Rock. I'm going to make this very simple for you, son. You are going to plead guilty. You are going to express remorse, however feigned it may be. And I am going to sentence you to 6 months in the Oakwood Juvenile Correction Facility. Perhaps some structure and discipline there will succeed where your family and community have so clearly failed. Oakwood. Sarah Jenkins felt a familiar chill. It was a private facility notoriously harsh, and Judge Harrington seemed to have a particular fondness for sending young men of color there. Rumors had swirled for years about kickbacks and connections, but no one had ever been able to prove anything. Your Honor, 6 months is wildly excessive for a first-time vandalism charge, Sarah protested. The guidelines suggest probation community service at most. I am the guidelines. Ms. Jenkins, Harrington said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. And in my court, we don't coddle criminals. We punish them. So, Mr. Williams, he turned his full venomous attention back to the silent young man. What is it to be? Do you accept the generosity of this court's plea offer? Or do you wish to waste more of the taxpayers' money with a pointless trial? The courtroom held its breath. The young man, D-Rock, looked from the judge to his anxious public defender. He took a slow breath. For the first time, a flicker of something, not fear, but something else, something calculating, passed through his eyes. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to Sarah Jenkins. My client pleads guilty, Your Honor. She said, her voice heavy with defeat. Excellent. Harrington beamed, his victory complete. Now for the allocation. Do you have anything to say for yourself, Mr. Williams, before I sentence you to a place where you might finally learn some manners? The young man finally spoke. His voice was quiet with a slight, almost practiced rasp, as if he were forcing a street effect. Nah, he mumbled, looking down again. It is what it is. Profound, the judge sneered. Truly the words of a modern-day philosopher. Bailiff prepared to remand the defendant. He was enjoying this, savoring the moment. He was a god in this room, dispensing judgment upon the unworthy. He had no idea he was staring into the eyes of his own destruction. Sarah Jenkins sat with her client in the small, sterile holding room adjacent to the courtroom while they waited for the transport to Oakwood. The air was thick with the silence of defeat. Sarah was used to losing, but this one felt particularly galling. The judge's prejudice had been so naked, so brazen. I'm sorry, David, she said softly, using his given name. I should have fought harder. The young man who had been staring at the wall turned his head. The sullen, defeated mask was gone. In its place was an expression of sharp, focused intelligence. The shift was so sudden it was jarring. You did everything you could, Ms. Jenkins, he said. His voice was different now. The street rasp was gone, replaced by a clear, articulate baritone that held no trace of a teenager's uncertainty. You operated perfectly within the limited confines of a compromised system. Sarah blinked. What? The legal term is judicial bias. He continued, his eyes locking onto hers. Specifically a violation of Canon 3 of the Code of Conduct for United States Judges, which demands a judge perform duties without bias or prejudice. Harrington didn't just cross the line, he sprinted past it. Sarah Jenkins felt a strange sense of vertigo. She looked at the file on the table. Davin D-Rock Williams, age 18. Graduated Northwood High with a 1.8 GPA. 2 minor dismissed priors. This was not the person speaking to her. Who are you? She stammered. He gave a small wry smile. For the purposes of this case, I am Davin Williams, but my real name is Leo Maxwell. Leo Maxwell. The name meant nothing to her. What are you talking about? Is this some kind of prank? No prank, he said, his tone serious. Back in the courtroom when you mentioned the sentencing guidelines, you were correct. For a misdemeanor vandalism charge, especially for a first offense, the presumptive sentence is probation. Harrington's jump to 6 months in a secured facility is a punitive overreach, a clear departure from standard practice. Did you know he's sentenced over 200 youths to Oakwood in the last 3 years, 85% of whom are African American or Hispanic? Sarah was speechless. How do you know that? I know a lot of things, Leo said. I know that the Oakwood Juvenile Correction Facility is owned by a private equity firm, Sterling Holdings, LLC. He paused, letting the name hang in the air. Sarah's mind raced. Sterling? Sterling? Where had she heard that name? Sterling, Leo prompted gently. As in Judge Harrington's wife's maiden name. Her brother Robert Sterling is the CEO of the firm. The judge is funneling taxpayer money directly into his brother-in-law's pocket by sentencing children to his facility. The blood drained from Sarah's face. The rumors, they weren't rumors. My God, but no one's been able to prove it. The paperwork is a maze. It is, Leo agreed, which is why a different kind of evidence was needed. First-hand, irrefutable evidence of his conduct and prejudice in action, delivered under oath in his own courtroom. It was then that Sarah Jenkins understood. The disguise, the slumped posture, the mumbled slang, the guilty plea. It was all an act, a meticulously crafted performance. You let him do this, she whispered, a sense of awe dawning on her. You let him mock you, sentence you. You wanted him to. To quote a certain judge, it paints a picture, doesn't it? Leo said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. We needed him to be himself, arrogant, biased, so sure of his own power that he wouldn't look closely at the case file of one more kid he deemed worthless. He looked at her directly. And we needed a witness, a decent, honest officer of the court who would be horrified by what she saw. Someone like you, Ms. Jenkins. Suddenly, a detail from the courtroom exchange clicked in her mind. It had seemed so strange at the time. Before you took the plea, Sarah said, her voice trembling with excitement, I was about to argue for a dismissal based on a potential Brady violation. The arresting officer's report mentioned a witness who said you were 100 yards from the monument when the supposed vandalism happened, but the DA never turned that over to me. Leo nodded, impressed. Brady v. Maryland. The duty to disclose exculpatory evidence. Excellent catch. I was going to bring it up myself if things went sideways, but I decided to let it go. A wrongful conviction, even a minor one, is a powerful tool. The door clanked and a large, impassive bailiff looked in. Williams, transport's here. Let's go. Sarah looked at Leo, her heart pounding. He was going to Oakwood. The plan was still in motion. What happens now? She mouthed silently. Leo stood up and the D-Rock persona slid back into place as easily as putting on a coat. His shoulders slumped, his eyes went to the floor. As he passed her, he spoke in a low, almost inaudible whisper, the articulate lawyer vanishing once more. The show's not over, he murmured, the rasp returning to his voice. Wait for the third act. He shuffled out of the room, flanked by the bailiff, leaving Sarah Jenkins sitting in stunned silence. Her understanding of justice, and the young man known as D-Rock, completely and irrevocably shattered. She wasn't watching a victim being led to slaughter. She was watching a hunter entering the lion's den, armed with a trap of the lion's own making. 6 weeks earlier, the office was aggressively bland, the kind of anonymous government space designed to be forgotten. It smelled of weak coffee and ozone from the humming servers. Leo Maxwell, dressed in a sharp but unassuming suit, sat across from a woman whose presence filled the room far more than the standard-issue furniture. Agent Isabella Rossi of the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division was a force of nature. In her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and hair pulled back in a severe bun, she radiated an aura of no-nonsense competence. She slid a thick file across the table. The name on the tab read, Harrington Arthur. We've been watching him for 2 years. Leo, Rossi said, her voice a low, gravelly hum. We have the financials. We have the shell corporations. We have the statistical data showing a pattern of discriminatory sentencing that is statistically impossible to be coincidental. We have everything. Everything except the linchpin. Leo finished for her, opening the file. He was already familiar with its contents, having studied it for a week straight. You can't definitively tie his sentencing to a quid pro quo with his brother-in-law. It's all circumstantial. A good defense attorney would paint him as a tough-on-crime judge, and his brother-in-law as a successful businessman. They'd create reasonable doubt. Exactly, Rossi confirmed, leaning forward. The corruption is the skeleton, but the prejudice is the muscle that moves it. We need to prove not just what he's doing, but why he feels so comfortable doing it. We need to put his bigotry on the record. We need him in his own kingdom to condemn himself with his own words." Leo looked up from the file. At 26, he was the youngest attorney in their division, a prodigy who had graduated Yale Law at 21 and had already made a name for himself taking on complex civil rights cases. But this was different. This wasn't about filing motions. It was about infiltration. "And that's where I come in," Leo said. "It wasn't a question. You're 26, but you can pass for 18, Rossi stated. "You grew up in a rough neighborhood in Chicago before your scholarship. You know the cadence, you know the culture. You're not just some Ivy League lawyer trying to play a part. You can be the part. More importantly, you have the legal mind of a shark. If things go wrong in that courtroom, you're the only one I trust to navigate it in real time." The plan was audacious, dangerous, and bordered on entrapment. They would create a phantom defendant. Davin D. Rock Williams was a composite built from the records of a dozen real teenagers whose lives had been steamrolled by judges like Harrington. They fabricated a sealed juvenile record with minor dismissed charges. They created a backstory, a social media presence, a life. Then they staged a minor crime spraying washable paint on a public monument and had a trusted local police contact, Officer Miller, make the arrest. The risk was immense. If Harrington saw through the disguise, if the plan was exposed, the political fallout would be catastrophic. The DOJ would be accused of manufacturing a case, and Harrington would walk away a martyr. "The public defender is Sarah Jenkins." Rossi continued tapping a photo in the file. "Clean record, overworked. By all accounts, she genuinely cares, but she's beaten down by the system. She's our canary in the coal mine. Her reactions will be our gauge of the courtroom's atmosphere." Ifrum, Leo spent the next month in deep immersion. It wasn't just about clothes and slang. It was about posture, attitude, the subtle language of the streets he had worked so hard to leave behind. He practiced slouching, mumbling, avoiding eye contact. He studied the mannerisms of teenagers in the neighborhood where they'd staged the arrest. He had to unlearn years of professional polish and reclaim a part of himself he thought was long gone. He met with a dialect coach not to learn an accent, but to perfect the subtle imperfections of speech, the grammatical shortcuts that would make D-Rock believable. He and Rossi rehearsed the courtroom scenario 100 times, gaming out every possible move Harrington could make, every legal objection, every contingency. The key, Rossi told him in their final meeting before the operation went live, is to never break character. Not with the bailiffs, not with the other inmates, and especially not with Jenkins. Until the moment you decide to reveal yourself, you are Davin Williams. You are a scared, defiant kid caught in the gears of a machine you don't understand. "I understand it all too well," Leo had replied quietly. "I've seen what this machine does to people who look like me my whole life. The only difference is now I'm in a position to break the machine." Present day, Oakwood Juvenile Correction Facility. The transport van was suffocatingly hot. Leo, now fully in character as D-Rock, sat shackled between two other teenagers. One was crying silently. The other stared ahead with dead eyes. Oakwood was even worse than the file suggested. It wasn't a place of correction. It was a warehouse of despair. The guards were brutish, the facilities were run down, and the educational programs were a joke. A bleak, oppressive atmosphere hung over the place, designed to crush the spirit. For 3 days, Leo lived it. He ate the tasteless food. He endured the pointless headcounts and the casual cruelty of the staff. He kept his head down, observing, collecting mental notes that were more damning than any financial record. He saw a guard deny a boy his asthma inhaler as punishment. He heard another guard openly mock a kid for being unable to read. He spoke to other inmates using the quiet moments in the yard or the chow hall. He didn't ask about legal cases. He asked about their judges. The name Harrington came up again and again, a dark legend among these forgotten boys. They spoke of his sneer, his speeches, his apparent joy in sending them here. Leo's resolve hardened into cold, diamond-hard anger. This wasn't just about financial corruption anymore. This was about a man systematically destroying the lives and futures of young men for profit and prejudice. On the 4th day, he was granted his state-mandated phone call. He didn't call a family member. He called a special secure number. "Rossi," he said, his voice a low whisper. "Leo, status," came the immediate reply. "The place is a human rights violation with a fresh coat of paint," Leo reported grimly. The anecdotal evidence is overwhelming. We have everything we need. Are we ready to move? The motion is drafted and ready to file, Rossi confirmed. We've been monitoring Harrington's docket. He's presiding over a high-profile embezzlement case tomorrow. The press will be there. Perfect, Leo said. An audience. The writ of habeas corpus will be served to the warden at 9 a.m. sharp, Rossi continued. It'll demand that Davin Williams be brought to courtroom 4B to appear as a material witness in a federal investigation. It will be sealed so no one will know the details. The transport should have you there by 10:30. And Sarah Jenkins, Leo asked. She's been subpoenaed. She'll be there. A faint smile touched Leo's lips. Good. The judge is about to get a surprise visitor. He hung up the phone. A guard nearby shoved him lightly. Time's up, Williams. Back to your cell. Leo shuffled away the picture of compliance. But inside, the brilliant legal mind was already rehearsing his opening statement. The third act was about to begin. The next morning, courtroom 4B was abuzz. The embezzlement case against a well-known local CEO, Richard Powell, had drawn a crowd. Reporters scribbled in notepads and the gallery was filled with well-dressed onlookers. Judge Harrington was in his element, presiding over a case that reaffirmed his status and importance. He was jovial, making witty remarks to the prosecution and defense, a stark contrast to the tyrant who had sentenced D-Rock just days before. Sarah Jenkins sat in the back row clutching a subpoena that had appeared on her desk that morning. It was vague, commanding her presence as a witness in a federal matter to be unsealed in Judge Harrington's court. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She scanned the room looking for a sign for Leo, but saw nothing. Was this it? Was the plan in motion? At 10:28 a.m., Ada Kent Olson was in the middle of questioning a financial expert. Judge Harrington was listening intently, a thoughtful expression on his face. Suddenly, the main doors of the courtroom swung open with a loud thud. All heads turned. Two imposing U.S. Marshals in dark suits stood in the doorway. Between them, looking small and out of place, was Davin Williams. He was no longer in his street clothes, but in a standard-issue juvenile detention jumpsuit, several sizes too big, the name Oakwood stenciled on the back. He was still in character, head down, shuffling his feet. Judge Harrington's face, once a mask of judicial poise, curdled into a scowl of pure rage. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" he thundered, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent room. "Bailiff, remove this individual at once, one of the U.S." Marshall stepped forward, holding up a document. His voice was calm and unshakable. "Your Honor, we are acting under the authority of a writ of habeas corpus issued by the United States District Court for the Southern District. We are ordered to produce the body of Davin Williams before this court." The room erupted in confused murmurs. The reporters leaned forward, smelling a story far more interesting than corporate fraud. Harrington was livid. "A writ for what purpose? This court's business with Mr. Williams is concluded. He is serving a legally rendered sentence." The marshal remained impassive. "He is to be presented as a material witness in a federal investigation. Your Honor, case number US 7881 sealed." Harrington's face went from red to a pale blotchy white. A federal investigation here in his courtroom. He looked at the boy in the jumpsuit, a flicker of something, not understanding, but a primal fear in his eyes. It made no sense. "This is outrageous," he sputtered. "A procedural absurdity. What possible testimony could this delinquent offer in a federal case?" From his position between the marshals, the young man in the jumpsuit slowly lifted his head. The slump in his shoulders straightened. He stood taller, his posture shifting from that of a defeated teen to one of unshakable confidence. He met Judge Harrington's gaze, and his eyes, once dull and avoidant, were now blazing with an incandescent fire. He took a step forward, and the marshal subtly parted to let him pass. He walked not to the defendant's table, but directly toward the witness stand. And then he spoke. The voice that filled the courtroom was not the mumbled, raspy slang of D-Rock. It was the powerful, resonant, and perfectly modulated voice of a seasoned orator. "That," he said, his voice ringing with clarity and authority, "is what I am here to establish." A collective gasp went through the room. Ada Kent Olson's jaw dropped. The CEO on trial looked on in bewilderment. Sarah Jenkins felt a surge of adrenaline, a triumphant smile finally breaking across her face. Judge Harrington stared utterly dumbfounded. It was the same face, the same person he had mocked and sentenced, but it was as if an entirely different soul was looking out from behind the eyes. "Who in God's name are you?" Harrington whispered, his authority evaporating into thin air. The young man reached the witness stand, turned and faced the judge, the gallery, the press, and the world. The transformation was complete. He was no longer a boy in a jumpsuit. He was a commander on a battlefield of his own choosing. "My name," he declared, his voice cutting through the stunned silence, "is Leo Maxwell. I am an attorney with the United States Department of Justice Civil Rights Division." He paused to let the shockwave roll through the room. "And, Your Honor," he continued, his eyes locking onto the judge's, "my testimony concerns a conspiracy of judicial misconduct, discriminatory sentencing, and racketeering. A conspiracy orchestrated by and for the sole benefit of the man sitting on that bench, Judge Arthur Harrington." The gavel on the judge's bench sat untouched. For the first time in 20 years, Arthur Harrington was no longer in control of courtroom 4B. The atmosphere in courtroom 4B did not just change, it fractured. The air itself seemed to crystallize, holding every person in a state of suspended animation. The reporters who moments before had been lazily documenting a white-collar crime were now rigid, their pens hovering over their notepads, their eyes wide with the electrifying realization that the story of their careers had just detonated in front of them. The accused CEO, Richard Powell, was a forgotten statue in the witness box. Ada Kent Olson stood agape, his carefully constructed case now a meaningless sideshow, his face a canvas of pure, unadulterated shock. In the back row, Sarah Jenkins was on her feet, a hand pressed to her mouth, tears of vindication welling in her eyes. This was the justice she had stopped letting herself dream of. And at the center of it all, on the bench that was his throne, Judge Arthur Harrington sat as if struck by lightning. The blood had drained from his face, leaving behind a mottled waxen mask. He stared at the young man in the juvenile detention jumpsuit, the man who now called himself Leo Maxwell of the Department of Justice, as if seeing a ghost. The sneer, the arrogance, the godlike authority he wore like a second skin had evaporated, leaving only a hollow, terrified shell. Leo Maxwell let the silence stretch, a conductor, savoring a dramatic pause. He stood at the witness stand, not as a witness, but as a prosecutor, a judge and a jury all in one. The courtroom was his. "My name is Leo Maxwell." He repeated, his voice slicing through the stunned silence with the precision of a scalpel. "And I am here to provide testimony regarding a cancer that has been growing in this courthouse for years. A cancer of greed, prejudice, and corruption, with its heart sitting on that very bench." He turned his piercing gaze toward the paralyzed assistant district attorney. "Mr. Olson, let's begin with a simple lesson in constitutional law, shall we? You'll recall the landmark case Brady v. Maryland, a cornerstone of American jurisprudence. It establishes that the prosecution has an affirmative duty to disclose all evidence and information favorable to the defendant. This is not a suggestion, Mr. Olson. It is a command. It is the bedrock of due process." Olson flinched as if struck. I am aware of my Brady obligations. Are you?" Leo shot back, his tone icy. "Then I invite you to explain to this court and to the federal authorities now listening why a key piece of exculpatory evidence in the case against Davin Williams was deliberately withheld from his counsel. I'm referring to the supplementary report filed by the arresting officer, Matthew Miller. A report which contained the sworn statement of a Mrs. Elena Rodriguez, a bystander in Pendleton Park, who stated unequivocally that the young man she saw flee the police was, and I quote, "at least 100 yards from the monument when the commotion started." That report, Mr. Olson, never made it into Miss Jenkins's case file. Why? Kent Olson stammered, shuffling papers on his table, as if the answer might magically appear. "Files get misplaced. Clerical errors happen." "Clerical errors," Leo repeated, his voice dripping with disdain. "In this courthouse, clerical errors seem to happen with remarkable frequency when the defendant is a young man of color and the judge has a vested interest in a guilty plea. This wasn't an error. It was a strategic suppression of truth, encouraged by the implicit understanding that Judge Harrington had no interest in facts that contradicted his preferred narrative." Leo then turned his full, undivided attention back to the judge, who seemed to shrink under the weight of his gaze. "But a simple wrongful conviction is just a symptom of the disease, isn't it, Judge Harrington?" Let's talk about the cure you're so fond of prescribing, the Oakwood Juvenile Correction Facility. He took a slow step away from the witness stand, moving into the open space of the court, owning it. You've called it a beacon of discipline, a place for structured reform. I spent 4 days there. I can tell you what it truly is. It's a privately owned warehouse of despair staffed by underpaid guards who treat children with contempt, where education is non-existent and healthcare is treated as a privilege, not a right. But it is, I must concede, an incredibly profitable enterprise for its parent company, Sterling Holdings, LLC. At the mention of the name, a low gasp rippled through the gallery as the reporters connected the dots. Harrington flinched violently, a cornered animal, realizing the trap had been sprung. Sterling Holdings, Leo boomed, his voice resonating with righteous anger. A name that should be intimately familiar to you, Judge. After all, it bears the maiden name of your wife, Catherine Sterling, and its founder and CEO is your brother-in-law, Robert Sterling. For years, legal watchdogs and journalists have suspected a connection, but the financial trail was a masterfully constructed labyrinth of shell corporations and blind trusts. We navigated the labyrinth, Judge, Leo said, his voice dropping to a low conspiratorial tone. We found that for every juvenile you sentenced to Oakwood, the state of Franklin paid a per diem of $275 to the facility. Of that fee, a staggering $50 was funneled from Sterling Holdings to a secondary company, Mid-Atlantic Youth Services, a company with no employees in no office, which exists only on paper. From there, the money was transferred to the Harrington Family Trust, an entity you personally control. We have the wire transfer records. We have the bank statements. For the last 5 years, you have been paid a bounty for every child you condemned, and you were a prolific bounty hunter. Over 400 children, Judge, an average of 80 per year. At $50 a head, that's a tidy tax-free supplement to your judicial salary, isn't it? But you didn't cast a wide net. You were specific. Your data shows a clear, undeniable pattern. Privileged white teenagers from the suburbs charged with DUIs, felony drug possession, even assault. They received probation, admonishments to do better. But poor Black and Hispanic kids from the inner city charged with truancy, loitering, or petty vandalism. They were your gold mine. You threw the book at them. You fed them to your brother-in-law's machine to line your pockets. Harrington finally exploded, a surge of desperate adrenaline breaking through his paralysis. Lies! He shrieked, his voice cracking. This is a performance, a vindictive theatrical fabrication by a rogue agent. You have no proof. These are slanders. I will have your bar license. I will sue the Department of Justice into oblivion. Leo stood still, letting the judge's frantic tirade echo and die in the cavernous room. When silence returned, Leo's response was chillingly calm. You're right about one thing, Judge. It was a performance. My performance, he said, gesturing to his own jumpsuit. Because the money trail, as damning as it is, wasn't enough. A skilled lawyer could argue it away, create doubt. We knew we had to prove the mens rea, the state of mind. We had to prove the malicious intent, the depraved indifference to justice that fueled your entire enterprise. We needed to put your prejudice on the record in your own words, delivered from your own bench. That was the purpose of Davin D-Rock Williams, Leo stated, locking eyes with Harrington. He was the bait, a carefully constructed persona designed to appeal to your deepest, ugliest biases. The baggy jeans, the hoodie, the mumbled slang. I was a walking caricature of everything you despise. And you took the bait hook, line, and sinker. You didn't see a citizen deserving of due process. You saw a delinquent, a miscreant, a thing to be mocked and discarded. You didn't preside over a case. You indulged in a monologue of racist vitriol. You did it all on a live sworn record in front of officers of the court. You didn't just sentence a defendant that day, Judge. You delivered your own confession, signed and sealed. As the last word fell, the grand double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a resounding thud. Every head swiveled. Framed in the doorway was Agent Isabella Rossi, her face set like granite. She was flanked by 2 stone-faced U.S. Marshals, their suits unable to conceal the solid bulk of their frames or the hardware on their belts. The trio didn't pause at the entrance. They began a slow, deliberate walk down the center aisle. The sound of their footsteps on the marble floor was the only sound in the room, a steady rhythmic beat counting down the final seconds of Arthur Harrington's life as he knew it. The air crackled with a new, more terrifying authority. Rossi's procession was a force of nature. She walked past the stunned reporters, past the cowering form of Kent Olson, past the tearful but resolute Sarah Jenkins. She didn't stop at the bar that separated the gallery from the court. She passed through the gate, her stride unbroken, and walked directly to the elevated platform of the judge's bench, a sanctum she violated with absolute purpose. She stopped directly beside the judge's chair, looking up at the broken, trembling man. Harrington stared at her, his mouth agape, a string of saliva trailing from his lip. The fight was gone, replaced by the primal terror of the damned. Agent Rossi held up the thick, blue-backed federal warrant. Her voice was devoid of emotion, as cold and hard as the law she was there to enforce. "Arthur Harrington," she announced, her voice cutting through the silent courtroom like a trumpet of doom. "You are hereby under arrest by the authority of the United States Department of Justice. The charges include multiple counts under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, conspiracy to commit wire and mail fraud, and deprivation of rights under color of law." She slapped the warrant down on the polished wood in front of him. The sound was like a gunshot. "Please rise," she commanded, "and remove your robe. You are no longer a judge of this or any other court in the United States." Harrington did not move. He simply stared at the document, his mind finally completely broken. The black robe, the symbol of his power and his shield for 2 decades, now seemed to be crushing him, a heavy shroud of his own making. With hands that shook so violently he could barely control them, he fumbled with the top button. The mighty judge had not just fallen. He had been utterly and completely unraveled. The moment the courtroom doors closed behind the disgraced Judge Harrington and his federal escorts, the dam of stunned silence broke into a torrential flood of chaos. An explosion of camera flashes strobed through the room, creating a disorienting, frantic light. Reporters, no longer bound by courtroom decorum, surged forward, shouting questions at a stone-faced Agent Rossi, who simply raised a hand and stated, "The Department of Justice will issue a full statement at 4 p.m. before turning and striding out with her team." They swarmed Leo Maxwell next to a wall of microphones and cameras thrust in his face. He stood for a moment, the ill-fitting oakwood jumpsuit a stark symbol of his journey, and simply said, "Today, justice was not blind. She was simply undercover." With that, the U.S. Marshals formed a protective circle around him and escorted him from the room, leaving a whirlwind of speculation in his wake. The story wasn't just a story, it was a national phenomenon. The takedown of Judge Harrington, executed so publicly and dramatically, became the lead item on every news broadcast. Legal analysts on cable news channels dissected Leo's performance with a mixture of awe and professional envy. They called his strategy the Maxwell Maneuver, a high-risk, high-reward gambit that had perfectly weaponized a corrupt judge's own prejudice against him. Headlines blared across the country. The Franklin City Ledger ran a full-page photo of Harrington's collapsed face with the headline, "The King of Courtroom 4B Dethroned." The National Tribune was more poetic. "Gavel of tyranny shattered by the ghost in the jumpsuit." Harrington's allies, the powerful figures who had benefited from his influence for years, were rendered impotent. The public nature of his fall from grace made him radioactive. There could be no backroom deals, no quiet dismissals. The evidence was too public, the confession too damning. His trial was a formality, a final futile gasp of a dying legacy. His high-priced defense attorneys attempted to argue entrapment, painting Leo Maxwell as a manipulative agent who lured an unsuspecting judge into a trap. But the prosecution, led by a steely-eyed veteran from the DOJ's Public Integrity Section, dismantled their arguments with ruthless efficiency. They played the audio recordings from the sentencing of Davin Williams. In the cold, clear light of a federal courtroom, Harrington's sneering racist monologue sounded even more monstrous. Agent Rossi's team presented the labyrinthine financial records, now laid out in simple, devastating charts that showed the direct flow of cash from the suffering of children to the judge's bank account. The final nail in Harrington's coffin was his own brother-in-law. Robert Sterling, facing a mountain of evidence and the prospect of spending the rest of his life in one of his own mismanaged facilities, took a plea deal. His testimony was a pathetic, self-serving account of greed, but it unequivocally confirmed the entire kickback scheme detailing dates, times, and conversations with Harrington. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. Arthur Harrington was found guilty on all 19 counts. At his sentencing, the presiding federal judge, a stern woman named Judge Ramirez, looked down at him with undisguised contempt. "For 20 years, you wore the robe of a judge while acting as a predator," she stated, her voice ringing through the silent court. "You perverted the very idea of justice, turning it into a tool for personal enrichment. You preyed on the most vulnerable, betraying your oath, your community, and your humanity. It is the sentence of this court that you will spend the remainder of your natural life in a federal penitentiary. You will trade your black robe for a prisoner's jumpsuit, a fitting symmetry for the lives you so casually destroyed." The shockwaves from the verdict radiated outwards, triggering a systemic purge. The infamous Oakwood Juvenile Correction Facility was shuttered, its grounds declared a federal crime scene. The state legislature, deeply embarrassed, launched the Harrington Case Review Initiative, a task force with the monumental goal of re-examining every single juvenile case he had ever presided over. The Franklin County Courthouse became a place of pilgrimage for hundreds of families who had long ago given up hope. Mothers and fathers clutched frayed case files, their eyes filled with a terrifying, fragile optimism. The scenes in the hallways were raw with emotion as one by one wrongful convictions were overturned, sentences were vacated, and records were expunged. The machinery of justice, so long corrupted, began the slow, arduous work of grinding in reverse. For Sarah Jenkins, the world had turned on its axis. She was hailed as a hero in the public defender's office, a symbol of integrity. But she felt restless. She had won, but she knew there were 100 other Harringtons on benches across the country. A few months after the sentencing, her phone rang. It was an unfamiliar Washington, D.C. number. "Sarah Jenkins," she answered. "Sarah, it's Leo Maxwell." The voice was warm, familiar, but now unburdened by the weight of his undercover role. "Leo," she breathed, a smile instantly forming. "I should be calling you Mr. Maxwell. I saw you on the news last week. You're becoming quite famous." He laughed, a genuine, relaxed sound. "Hardly. I'm just the guy who got to state the obvious in a very dramatic way. The real work was done by people like you, day in and day out, long before I ever showed up." There was a pause. "That's actually why I'm calling," he continued, his tone shifting to business. "Agent Rossi and I are heading a new permanent division at the DOJ, the Judicial Integrity Task Force. Our mandate is to proactively investigate judicial corruption nationwide. We're building a team not of academics, but of practitioners, people who have been in the trenches, who know what injustice looks like up close, people who don't flinch." He didn't need to say more. Sarah understood. "You saw me flinch a dozen times in that courtroom, Leo." "I saw you get knocked down," he corrected gently. "And then I saw you get back up every single time. That's not flinching. That's resilience. We want you to join us, Sarah, as a lead investigative attorney. We don't want you fighting one corrupt judge anymore. We want you helping us hunt them all." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were not tears of frustration or vindication. They were tears of purpose. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely yes." 6 months later, Leah was walking through a park in a different city, reviewing a new file. A young man jogging on the path slowed as he approached, looking at Leo with a hesitant expression of recognition. "Excuse me," the young man said. You're that lawyer, right? The one from the news, Leo Maxwell." Leo smiled. "I am." "Wow, man, my name is Thomas," the young man said, shifting his weight. "I just wanted to say thank you. I was at Oakwood. Harrington sent me there. Said I had a defiant attitude because I questioned a traffic ticket. I lost a year of my life in that place." Leo stopped walking, giving Thomas his full attention. He saw the faint shadow of what the facility had tried to do to him, but he also saw a bright, resilient light in his eyes. "My record was wiped clean because of you." Thomas continued, his voice earnest. "I was going nowhere. Now I'm enrolled at the city college, taking night classes. I'm going to be a social worker. I want to help kids who get caught in the system, like I did. Of all the victories, the conviction, the media praised the new job, this was the one that landed with the most force. This was the abstract concept of justice made real, standing right in front of him, talking about a future that had been stolen and was now reclaimed. This was the point of it all. Leo reached out and shook the young man's hand. That's incredible, Thomas. You don't have to thank me. What you're doing now, paying it forward, that's the real victory. As Thomas nodded, smiled, and resumed his jog, disappearing down the tree-lined path, Leo Maxwell stood for a moment, the file in his hand forgotten. He had worn a mask of despair to unmask a tyrant, and in doing so had helped restore not just the law, but the futures of countless young men like Thomas. The scales of karma, he reflected, could be slow and heavy, but when they finally moved, they moved with the force of an earthquake, powerful enough to bring down mountains and allow new things to grow in the sunlight. The story of Leo Maxwell and Judge Harrington is a powerful reminder that true justice is not just about punishing the guilty, but about protecting the vulnerable. It shows that one person's courage, armed with intellect and conviction, can dismantle an empire of corruption. The judge, who saw a black teenager as nothing more than a stereotype and a source of illegal profit, was blind to the fact that he was staring at his own reckoning. His downfall wasn't just satisfying. It was a cleansing fire that allowed for healing and restoration for the countless lives he had damaged. This is the kind of hard karma we rarely get to see in the real world, a story where the system for once worked to correct itself from the inside out. If this story of righteous justice and epic karma resonated with you, please hit that like button to help us share it with more people. Consider subscribing to our channel and turning on notifications so you never miss a story of corruption exposed and justice served. And we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us what part of Judge Harrington's downfall was the most satisfying to you. Thank you for listening.